The nature and effect of the supernatural interloper in Paranormal Activity definitely evokes the symptoms of complex trauma. The film uses the haunted house motif to symbolize a mind or minds captured by a prolonged traumatic experience. The protracted time frame and the fluctuating intensity of the supernatural encounters suggest the recollection or production of chronic trauma rather than a single traumatic event. Furthermore, while the representation of monsters in all found footage horror films can be characterized as fragmented, the demon in Paranormal Activity is never visually documented by the camera. This casts doubt over whether the hauntings are real or reside solely in the characters' minds. Such doubt, in turn, demonstrates the dual opacity of trauma. That is, the suffering of the victim is obscured by the complex nature of their trauma, as well as the concealed spaces in which it primarily occurs. Similar to a victim's or therapist's attempts to understand complex trauma, the monster in Paranormal Activity is difficult to identify through a single element. Katie expresses unease about a range of strange domestic phenomena, such as opening and closing doors, moving objects, and flickering lights. Taken in isolation, each of these incidents could be dismissed, but combined and repeated, the incidents infer something supernatural in the characters' or viewers' minds. This gradual formulation of monstrosity evokes the struggles of the complex trauma victim to identify the source of their suffering. Like Katie, the victims cannot necessarily identify a specific or original event in their life to account for their distress. Rather, it is the prolonged and repetitive nature of various events that produces their disorder. An additional obstacle in identifying traumatic cause is the victim's failure to separate the pleasant and comforting characteristics of their home life from frightening and painful characteristics. Paranormal Activity symbolizes this cognitive schism, with its mise-en-scène continually transforming the mood from relaxed to threatening. The footage shot by Micah during the daytime depicts a prosaic but cheerful daily existence, observing Katie and himself as they work, study, watch television, entertain friends, cook and share meals, joke and flirt with one another, and swim in their backyard pool. During these moments, the camera movements are smooth and color palette is light and bright. However, footage shot during nighttime is saturated with deep grays and blacks, and the camera is either static when mounted on a tripod or frantic when responding to or investigating a strange event. This aesthetic transition demonstrates the dissociating effect that traumatic experience can have on setting. The only thing that changes is the character's relationship to that setting. Just as individuals can invest positive memories into their home, they can also invest negative memories. Paranormal Activity shows how the same house can simultaneously contain both, resulting in the characters feeling safe during some moments and in danger during others. While the setting remains static, the contrasting use of space evokes the character's shifting psychological perception of it. These subtle shifts reflect the difficulty for complex trauma victims when attempting to articulate their suffering. Herman's trauma research identifies alterations such as amnesia, transient dissociative episodes, and depersonalization and derealization as indicators of complex trauma. In Paranormal Activity, Katie undergoes several dissociative episodes, most notably when she gets out of bed at night and sleepwalks around the house. During one episode, Micah wakes up, grabs the recording camera, and follows her out into the backyard, where he engages in conversation with the half-conscious Katie. The next day, Katie cannot recall the event, and after Micah shows her the footage, she asks, "Where is she going?" This reference to herself in the third person implies a burgeoning depersonalization, as though she does not recognize that the woman in the video is her, or is starting to perceive herself from outside her own body. If we accept that the demon is real, the viewer might interpret these episodes as the entity's first attempts to possess Katie while she is psychologically vulnerable, controlling her like a puppet. However, if we read this episode as a metaphor for the manifestation of trauma, then it is consistent with other scenes in the film. At another point, the couple wakes up to find that their framed portrait has mysteriously cracked in its center. This image evokes complex trauma in two ways. Firstly, the crack may underline Katie's fragmented psyche and sense of self. Secondly, as Dawn Keeley points out, the woman in the photo is a different actress, than the one playing Katie. Textually, the characters do not address this discrepancy. However, subtextually, it suggests an erosion of, quote, the idea of a distinct, stable sense of self, and introduces Katie's fear, as well as perhaps provoking the viewer's fear, that, quote, we are not who we think we are. These scenes invert each other around the theme of depersonalization. In the sleepwalking scene, Katie fails to recognize that she is the woman in the frame, while in the cracked photo scene, she fails to recognize that she is not the woman in the frame. A later scene, in which Micah finds an old, half-burned photo of Katie in the attic, also infers Katie's dissociative mind. Katie claims that the photo cannot possibly exist, as all her childhood photos were destroyed in a house fire when she was young. She says that she cannot recall the fire, but remembers feeling scared. Katie's inability to recall a traumatic childhood event and its relationship to an image of Katie that cannot logically exist reinforces the theme of dissociation. That is, the photo represents a past version of Katie that became separated from her consciousness, but which has now returned by seemingly supernatural means. The use of the attic as the site of the photo's discovery utilizes the physical levels of the house to illustrate the different levels of consciousness that a person contains. Just as traumatic experiences reside in dissociated memories or states of consciousness, Katie discovers a lost and distressing image of her childhood hidden in a dark, dusty, rarely visited segment of her house. Paranormal Activity uses demonic possession as a metaphor to suggest the strange, unfamiliar, and frightening identities that might be hiding in the different sections of the complex traumatized person's mind.